The Bloc Québécois leader says some of his counterparts have been a little loose-lipped on foreign interference. Yves-François Blanchet has yet to read that top-secret report alleging some MPs have helped foreign agents. But when he does, Blanchet plans to keep the details to himself, unlike Green Party leader Elizabeth May and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau joined me for an exclusive interview yesterday, and he said the public inquiry into foreign interference will be the best way to get clarity on this.
Maybe they should not have had the right to read it if they don't know what to do or what not to do with such information. But I'm certain that they did not have the right to say that. I want to make sure that there's no case of MPs being compromised in my caucus. That's the only thing I need to know.
Richard Fadden is a former director of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and he joins me now. Richard Fadden, always good to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be there.
I wonder if I could start by getting your reaction to something that came up in my interview with the Prime Minister yesterday. When I asked him about Jagmeet Singh, suggesting that members of his caucus, the NDP caucus, were not affected by foreign interference. Just want to play this and get your reaction. Is it tenable to just go on without names attached to some of these allegations? I mean, Jagmeet Singh has said that there's nobody in his caucus he needs to worry about. Can you say the same thing with comfort and clarity?
I hadn't known that Jagmeet said that. I would be wary of any party leader drawing any sort of conclusion like that.
Including Mr. Singh?
I would be wary of any party leader drawing any conclusion like that.
Richard, what do you make of that? Jagmeet Singh's assertion and the Prime Minister's response there?
Well, I think too many parliamentarians are playing this a little bit too cute. Do you mind if I do a bit of alphabet soup with you?
Sure.
SR, Special Rapporteur, NSRIA, the National Security Review and Intelligence Agency, NSICOP, and PIFI. All of these agencies have looked at this issue of foreign interference in one shape, form, or other. And to the PM's credit, he asked two of them to actually look at the matter. But what I find striking about this, there's no parliamentary group involved in looking at this at all. There are words from the Prime Minister, from Mr. Singh and Ms. May, which are not particularly enlightening. So I think we need some form of parliamentary involvement in this, because in the final analysis, I think this isn't entirely a security and intelligence issue or a national security issue. It's an accountability issue. And the people who are most accountable are in no way involved in any of this research or in any of this analysis.
Okay, so NSICOP, though, would be a committee made up of MPs and senators, of parliamentarians, but they're bound by secrecy. You're talking about a more traditional committee, for example, like we have with finance or government operations, that sort of thing?
Yeah, what I was thinking of, could I ask you to cast your mind back to the Winnipeg Labs issue? Mm-hmm. And in May of 2023, the Leader of the House put out a press release saying he was constituting a committee of the House which would have access to secure documentation. And then he said they're constituting a panel of experts, 2 former Supreme Court justices and a Federal Court of Appeal justice, who would be empowered to judge and to formulate how things could be made public. What I don't understand is if they could do this for the Winnipeg Labs, why can't they do it here? To my mind, everybody says they're terribly concerned about foreign interference, but the parliamentarians seem to be pushing this out as far as they can. And as you know, Ms. Hogg or Justice Hogg is not entitled to release any of this information beyond a certain point. The only person who was authorized to issue or to release this information was the man you were interviewing yesterday. Yet the instinct seems to be to push it out to another agency, to another group other than parliamentarians.
Right. He was, the Prime Minister, obviously, was suggesting yesterday that he is not going to take extraordinary steps to provide clarity on this, is what I took from the interview, and urged essentially Canadians and journalists and commentators and experts to trust the individual processes, NSICOP and CIRA, the alphabet soup you went through. But as you say, Richard, the public inquiry into foreign interference can't sort of name names and reveal the things people are asking for. So what do you think can come from Justice Hogg on this? Because she said she's going to take it up. She thinks she can do this under her terms of reference. What can come out of that process to help us with this?
Well, I think if she goes through this exercise and, she talks to a whole bunch of people, it'll be interesting if she thinks she needs to speak to Mr. McGuinty and all of his people, for example. But I think in the end, she'll probably add some credibility to the findings that we've all been talking about from all of these various and sundry organizations. Having said that, that's a good thing, but we're still not going to get any names or any further. So what I do not really understand and would argue that we need to get around is the Prime Minister talked to you for 5 or 10 minutes yesterday about foreign interference. He could have said, my caucus is not affected, or my caucus is affected and I'm going to deal with it. Doesn't have to release names, doesn't have to do anything. All of the other party leaders could have done the same thing. And my sense is that unless something like this happens, there's going to be a huge question mark and a reduction in the confidence that people feel in their public institutions. Because all of this collection of alphabet soup institutions have said the same thing in one shape, form, or other. We have a serious foreign interference problem, but none of the party leaders have stood up and said, my caucus is affected or not, and I'm going to do something about it. So it seems to me that would go a long ways towards resolving some of the issues, even if, as I say, I think Justice Hogg will help the credibility of this whole file. But in the end, it is party leaders, the Prime Minister in particular, who's the man ultimately accountable for national security, who has to, I think, all of them have to stop referring this to other institutions and to step up themselves.
Well, the argument has been, and this has been what David McGuinty, the chair of NSICOP, has said, is that we want the party leaders to come together and have an adult conversation about this. Instead, kind of what we're getting are these fragmented assessments where Elizabeth May does a news conference one day and then several days later has another one to clarify it. Jagmeet Singh has his news conference, which seemingly contradicts Ms. May. Pierre Poilievre won't read the report because he says he doesn't want to have his hands tied. And Mr. Blanchette from The Block said today he's going to read it. He just wants to know if he's got anyone to worry about, and you will not see him speaking publicly about it because he doesn't think what Jagmeet Singh and Elizabeth May have done has been helpful. Does that sound like the adult conversation David McGuinty and his fellow parliamentarians are asking for? What does that look like to you?
No, it doesn't. It seems to me they're all looking to their particular interests. I mean, I understand at one level why Ms. May and Mr. Singh wanted to say something in public, but they wanted to say something in public that was classified secret. There's a bit of an oxymoron here. I think Mr. Blanchette's position at one level is more rational. But at another level, I don't understand, given all of the confusion that's surrounding this, Mr. McGuinty doesn't stand up and try and offer a few explanations, a few justifications. He's not a judge. We have a tradition in this country that judges don't defend their decisions. He's not a judge. I would think he, more than almost anybody, could add, a few facts here and a few facts there to increase the credibility of the process. But I don't think that the party leaders all making statements somewhat contradictory will add to their credibility.
This committee, NSICOP, however you want to say it, was created by this Prime Minister, right? So we're finding out about the issues here from a committee that he created. But he's also cast doubt on its findings after suggesting more than a year ago when he sent them on this assessment path that Canadians could sort of trust this committee because it was built for this kind of purpose. Where does that leave us? I mean, I guess the Prime Minister is free to disagree with the conclusions of this committee, but does it undermine its work? Does it undermine its findings, or is this just the normal tension between the executive and a committee?
I think this is quite extraordinary. As you know, the Prime Minister had access to this report, I think it was April or March.
March 22nd, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, he could have asked NSICOP for clarification. He could have asked them to talk to CSIS. Indeed, he could have asked the Privy Council office to contact our close allies and see what they thought of all of this. So to wait until yesterday or the day before, or whenever he said this, to say that he had preoccupations strikes me as extraordinary. He, amongst everybody else in this country, is able, has the authority and the responsibility to clarify any preoccupations that he might have, and if necessary, ask McGuinty and company to issue a new report. But I think that does a great deal of harm to not the NSICOP itself, but what governments are going to do with the system. I think it's to Mr. Trudeau's government's credit that he created NSICOP. But I think you'll recall, or I hope you'll recall, NSICOP issued a report not too long ago chastising the government for not implementing or dealing seriously with their recommendations. So clearly there's an issue here.
So just as a final point, I mean, just to go through the leaders, you've got Mr. Trudeau, who is sort of casting doubt on the findings of the committee he created and has been criticized for kind of ignoring the recommendations of, really, for a number of years. Ms. May, who says she's still alarmed about the issue, but more relieved about the composition of the House of Commons. Jagmeet Singh says he's more alarmed after reading it. Mr. Blanchet, who says he won't say, but Mr. Poilievre, who says he won't read it at all because he feels this is not something he needs to do because he'll have his hands tied. What's the best path here? Should Mr. Poilievre read it, or is he better off staying out of it until the judge renders some sort of a decision later this year?
I think he should read it, and I don't buy the argument that his hands are going to be tied. Throughout the last several decades, members of Parliament have been briefed on security things on what's called a Privy Council basis. Their colleagues in Westminster and in Australia do this on a regular basis. I don't think these circumstances are so special and the issue is so unimportant that Mr. Poilievre, who is after all a potential Prime Minister, can simply say on this important national security issue, I want to maintain my ability to comment on a piece of paper that I haven't read. So I think he should read it. And whether or not he makes a public statement, of course, is for him to judge. But particularly since all of the other party leaders will have seen the report, I'm not sure it, again, will reinforce our confidence in the possibility that, he will take national security seriously in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
Former CSIS Director Richard Fadden, always appreciate the time. Thank you, sir.
Good to talk to you.
All right, so what are Canadians thinking about all of this? Let's bring in the power panel on that. Kate Harrison is a conservative political analyst. Emily Nicolas is a columnist with Le Devoir. Michelle Cadario is a former Liberal National Campaign Director. And Françoise Boivin is a former NDP MP. Françoise, I'd like to start with you. What did you make of the Prime Minister there in his response to what Jagmeet Singh had to say about there's no one he has to worry about in his caucus?
First, he was startled, and second, I was startled. I was startled that the Prime Minister was not aware, or nobody made him aware of what Jagmeet Singh had said. I mean, if I'm going to go do an interview with D. David, believe you me, I mean, seriously,
that's reserved for David Common, by the way. But anyway, go ahead.
I would say to my team, you briefed me on everything. I mean, as much as you can. But that set aside, he really looked startled. Like he couldn't believe that Jagmeet Singh had said that. You remember last week, we were all relieved. I personally was super relieved after May said, I was wondering why she came out and said such a thing if she had the right to. But other than that, I was happy that all the traitors were put to rest and we would stop trying to hunt them and so on and so forth. And then come Jagmeet, and then I'm not sure I understand what he says versus what May says. And then Justin Trudeau's comment means that he shouldn't have said it because it's not true, or he shouldn't have said it because it implies that other party. I mean, I could see all the questioning in his head. As for Mr. McFadden, I might come back a bit later on that one. I'll let my other colleagues talk about it, but I so disagree with him. Part of the problem is themselves. The information, if two people can read the same thing, not understand a thing, imagine when they're briefed on interference, foreign interference, if they're that clear, no surprise that our leaders don't know what to do and with all that info.
Michelle, I couldn't, with the Prime Minister, when he paused, I said to him, look, people are going to look at those answers and think you're, implicating the New Democrats, and he wouldn't go further on that. I don't know if he was startled, as Françoise says, or just choosing his words very carefully, as a lot of politicians have who have read the report and have been asked about the specifics of the report. But where do you think we are in our understanding of all of this now, based on 3 different versions from 3 different leaders, and Mr. Blanchet saying, I'm going to read it and I'm going to shut up?
Well, good for Mr. Blanchet, actually. It's that's probably wise. But I think that what I'd like, from where I have heard of this, what Jagmeet Singh said in terms of his current MPs not being named in the report is actually consistent with what Elizabeth May said in terms of saying no current MPs are in this report. I think that what Mr. Trudeau and what I heard him say is he wasn't actually speaking specifically about who was in and who was out, because that is that he could see that as crossing the line in terms of what you're allowed to say and not. But what he talked about is that all party leaders should probably be taking concerns that are being raised more broadly about very seriously, and that each party leader has a responsibility to act within their own party to make sure that they are addressing those kinds of things that are within the party purview. And I suspect that when the commissioner comes out with her more comprehensive report and comprehensive set of recommendations, it's those very kinds of issues that will be raised. It's hard because this is all security matters and nobody can speak in specifics, and everyone is super cautious because they don't want to break the Secrets Act. They've taken an oath to uphold. So, I think that we all can read what we want into it or see different sides of it because it's such a murky communications that's coming out.
Well, and Emily, we all have to parse the meaning of every individual word because we are flying blind and the politicians are being careful and they are being selective. So the Prime Minister says you should be wary of any leader who says their caucus isn't touched by foreign interference. But what the report talks about is witting and unwitting participants in foreign interference. So touched by foreign interference could mean you were the target, you were solicited without knowing, and then witting and unwitting implies a level of corroboration or willful blindness. Like it is so subjective and interpretive, it only adds to the confusion and lowers understanding at this point.
Yes, and it allows for people to panic, essentially. Because the problem with this report, and I think I've said this before, is that the definition of foreign interference in West Canada is so vast that now people associate foreign interference with issue of somebody trying to rig an election. And really what it's included is in this report is much, much more broader than that. There's issue of just influencing policy. There's issue of just meeting with diplomats or meeting with people who have ties with foreign countries. And because all of that is tied together, it makes for emotions to be running very high. And I think it implies, it has some consequences as well in terms of what we saw on the air with you when the Prime Minister was startled. First of all, he usually has a team of people thinking of putting communication lines with him. He didn't have that. He was put on the spot. And the words he chose, I think, can be explained if you understand foreign interference in the broadest sense possible. That everybody needs to be careful. Nobody is above the problem, but we do also need to realize that necessarily the closer you are to power, the more interesting you are to be influenced and be the target of any form of lobbying. Would it be from private sector? Would it be from civil society? Would it be from foreign actors as well? And so, of course, it's less likely for the NDP and the Bloc Québécois and the Green Party to be of interest to foreign actors, given that they've never held power in Ottawa. And so there is that, and I think it explains maybe why the NDP is feeling confident and speaking the way it does.
Right.
But at the same time, if you're talking about, just we need to solve the issue and make it nonpartisan, then the way that the Prime Minister answered made a lot of sense.
Kate, how do you view where we are now that 3 of 5 leaders have read it?
Yeah. I don't know that we're any further along in terms of understanding what foreign interference looks like in terms of the context and the scope. Who, of course, is actually at fault? Is it current parliamentarians, current senators, previous parliamentarians? Which parties are impacted? And I will say, I think Prime Minister Trudeau was correct to call out Jagmeet Singh for being so equivocal in that statement, because we should be taking a bit of a broader lens to the foreign interference question. So I think, we now have 3 party leaders that have seen it. We're not really any further along. We're still operating in a big information vacuum, which I think helps the Conservatives in terms of defending their position, in terms of letting Canadians see and decide and judge with some context how deep this interference runs. rather than just receiving a private briefing, choosing to, pronounce on some elements of that, or in, Mr. Blanchette's case, not at all. But let's put a little bit more sunlight, add some context, not just names, but add some context to this, because without that, we're going to continue operating in this very distrustful and sort of vague environment with people assuming the worst of their colleagues or future candidates.
Okay, I want to play something just on, because context comes with getting all the information and reading the report, which is something Mr. Poilievre won't do. And I asked Richard Fadden about that in the interview. I just want to play what the former head of CSIS had to say and get your reaction on the other side.
I think he should read it, and I don't buy the argument that his hands are going to be tied. I don't think these circumstances are so special and the issue is so unimportant that Mr. Poilievre, who is after all a potential prime minister, can simply say on this important national security issue, I want to maintain my ability to comment on a piece of paper that I haven't read.
Okay, Richard Fadden also said it doesn't give you a lot of confidence that a conservative government would take national security issues that seriously. He also criticized the Prime Minister for not acting on the past recommendations of NSICOP, a committee he created, and points to as how he takes this issue seriously. But that's the former head of CSIS saying the opposition leader should read it, he should know what's going on, and everybody needs to be informed and at the table if they're going to deal with this in Parliament.
Yeah, I think there is a difference between being aware of the contents via a briefing one-to-one. Obviously, there is a disagreement in terms of what the party leader can actually do in terms of disciplining caucus members, for example, that could be caught up in something like this. But there is a difference between having the context and all of that information in the report, or at least what can be shared, brought forward for everyone to see and judge, and what one individual leader may be privy to. I think actually seeing how Singh and May and Blanchette, and to some extent the Prime Minister, have responded so differently is actually a great rationale for why everybody should see some elements of this report rather than leave it to the determination exclusively of party leaders.
Right, but I guess, Francoise, party leaders have to deal with nominations, party leaders have to deal with leadership races and other party rules. I mean, the call from David McGuinty and others is for an adult conversation, and everybody's going off in their own direction like a foreign intelligence Tower of Babel story.
And that's what baffles me in a sense. We all claim that foreign interference is a serious, serious problem in this country. Well, if so, we should take it as such and act accordingly. Now, we've got a few people, because we have to understand when you're dealing with foreign interference and spying and treason and all type of concept like this, you have to tread very carefully legally, but also protect some sources and so on and so forth. Thus, the secrecy. You trust that your elected official, and even more so your leaders and the Prime Minister, to act really seriously upon the information that they're put. That's what we always say. Leave it to the adult in the room. I would have wished that it was all the leaders, that they would maybe have sat together and say, okay, we might not agree on everything or read the same thing inside the report or the information that is there. Some people might be more sensitive to certain aspects than others, but we can agree on common grounds, maybe on choosing our future candidates. Maybe like the registry. We've got a government that read the report at the top, that knows what's in there, and came up with bill, I think it's C-70 or...
Yep.
I might... And in bill C-70, you should see almost elements of answers to a problem. I'm not so sure that we see everything into it, because I suspect that there will be some claims about all these sponsored by other countries, sponsors trips to some little delegation. And I'm not talking about going to learn how they do their election in certain countries, but to try to influence politically and show certain aspect, even Gaza, Palestine, Israel, so many of these things that are, the bill is footed by those groups outside of our parliament. There might be some recommendation at some point in time by the commissioner. That's why I say at this point in time, he's the only adult left, and hopefully she'll have a stronger recommendation than what we're reading right now.
Okay, but Michelle, you know, the judge, the statement from the commission in taking this up says, this will all be done in accordance with the rules and principles applicable to any independent commission of inquiry and include the obligation to respect the principles of procedural fairness and the fundamental rights of any person affected by its work in compliance with the rule of law. So a very judicial type lens and process is going to be taken here. Everybody who deals with intelligence or dealt with intelligence for their career, like Richard Fadden, Ward Elcock, experts like Philippe Lagacé and Stephanie Carpenter, who we've had on the show, they all say this is a role for the party leaders in Parliament to deal with. And they're all coming up with process reasons not to deal with it directly as leaders of the parties of Parliament by sending it to the inquiry or saying, you know, other bits of legislation stop me from dealing with these things. I mean, what do you make of this using process as a shield?
Well, first off, I don't think that there's anything wrong with sending it to the Commissioner of Inquiry, to a judge, to someone who actually is who knows the scope of the law, to be able to come back with real recommendations. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean that from there, then the party leaders don't act. You know, it might be precipitous for them to act without it, and right. You know, having those kinds of recommendations makes sense. But the very fact that Pierre Poilievre continues to put his head in the sand and would actually rather see, in sense of what he's saying, that let's just burn any of our intelligence assets because I need to make a political point. Is he suggesting that all of his cabinet documents are going to be open? Is he suggesting that he's never going to take a top secret briefing, that it's just going to be a complete open government? Not a chance. And so he's being a hypocrite on this. And, you know, how can you take him seriously and believe that he actually cares about this issue? You know, I don't want to say that he's covering something up.
Calling for the public release of names, though, Michelle. He's calling for the public release of names. That is not putting your head in the sand. That could impact his own colleagues. Let's start a big list. Let's start a list of people who aren't confirmed and in the process maybe put people's lives in danger. He's asking for a list that he doesn't even know what it is. So how about actually go and read the report, see what it is, see what the intelligence sources are and who they are and how they came about this information, if anybody would be put at risk in terms of putting that information out. And then if he still feels the same, nothing's stopping him from saying that afterwards.
Exactly.
At all. There's nothing stopping him from saying it after he's actually read the report.
Okay.
Informed.
I got to get to a break, but I want to give Emily a quick last word.
I think we need to backtrack a little bit. Last summer, we waited for weeks for MPs to put together the terms for a commission of inquiry, because after everybody was calling for inquiry, they realized how hard it was to come up with terms that made sense to look into this conversation in a way that would be productive and helpful. The committee of MPs that worked on those terms for that commission worked really hard and then realized that David Johnston wasn't so, wrong when he was saying that this issue was really complicated. And now we have this commission of inquiry. And what you have is a completely different process, basically a report drafted by MPs who's basically stolen the spotlight of a commission of inquiry that was carefully for months thought through in terms of how difficult it was to have this process not go off the rails because of how sensitive the information is. And so that's the situation we're in now, is that after we've spent all last summer realizing how hard it was to have this conversation in a way that was productive and not make the conversation go off rails, we're just ignoring that commission of inquiry and making the process go off rails. And that's been, It seems to me, the news cycle for the last 10 days.